We can also only ask people to work so much and be online so much. And I think one of the reasons that executives tend to be so limited on LinkedIn, it is just the sheer reality of time.
Yeah.
But as we find younger folks coming up the ranks, they will be accustomed to spending that time on LinkedIn. So that'll be interesting. Yeah. I think it's also a fascinating tool for research. I recall a couple of years ago, I went in for an interview and did some research on the individual I was meeting with. He was the CEO of a company. Mm-hmm. And there happened to be some personal anecdotes out there about him, which when reflected in the interview, the shock on it, like, how did you know that? And the exciting thing was twofold there. One, it showed that I at least had done my homework, but two, it says that people are multidimensional. And there is something really interesting about going beyond the basics, finding out the charitable organizations that they're interested in or where their passions lie, because at the end of the day, we certainly have to have the right products and services. We need to sell them at an appropriate value price. It needs to generate the right outcome for the customer and their customers. But people do still like to buy from people that they like or that they can trust. And when we can find that common ground, I think it helps establish trust. So whether you are doing aggregation and redistribution of content or coming up with some original ideas or just letting people get to know you, I think you're right that LinkedIn will become really, really valuable.
Yeah, which almost kind of is a nice segue into another trend that we had, which was the rise of the millennial buyer. This idea of the rise of the millennial buyer, who, in my opinion, being a millennial, cares a lot about that piece of the multidimensional human, and then also the holistic organization as well. So, meaning they want to know as much as they can about the person that is their account executive or who's going to manage their account, or even the executive team at the organization before making a purchase. And then they also want to know what those organizations are doing to give back. What are their diversity initiatives? What are they doing that's good for the world that we live in? Yeah. I think it's becoming more and more important for this millennial buyer. And this trend comes from we did a report on Sales Hacker last year, a survey. And we surveyed, I think we got just under 1,000 responses from the community. And we actually broke it down from age. So we asked people their age. And people that were 40 years and above, where they were getting their information from was ebooks and white papers. So that's, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. That's what
I'm feeling younger. That's not my source.
There you go. And then under 40 was super interesting. It was influencers and thought leaders was number one. Influencers and thought leaders is where people are getting the majority of their information under 40. And then the second, which I really like, is review sites. So things like G2 and those sort of sites. Those are the two areas where people are getting their information. So knowing that, it changes the game a little bit.
What's really interesting about that is if we don't have the over 40 crowd sharing their thought leadership.
Exactly, yeah.
Then there's going to be quite a lot we're also missing.
Yes.
Because they have depth, experience, richness.
Yes.
That is not going to get in the marketplace. And so perhaps it's almost a responsibility, if you will, for those who have that to get out there and share it so that we can advance others more quickly and give them the benefit of what we've learned along the way, because I'd like to think it's still of value.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point and a great point for more leaders to get on social, right? I don't want to say it's the blind leading the blind, because I've had some great experience, but I haven't had as much experience as you had. And if we look at that and we just take that data point and we see, okay, under 40 people are getting their information from influencers or thought leaders that are probably also under 40 that don't have the breadth and the experience that some of these top level executives have. Is it informing the right decisions? Are we going in the right direction in sales? I don't know. So I think we do need to hear from everyone within the sales community.
I want to take that into the diversity and inclusion trend. But before we go there, the millennial buyer, now you're saying, and the millennial employee, they're looking for understanding what a company is doing, their CSR, their diversity and inclusion, who they are as humans.
Yeah.
Culture is really important. But there is a reality that the millennial has the fortune of being in the greatest time in business ever, when we have more companies that have started in, probably the last 20 years than in all of history, right? And certainly many of them have not continued to succeed. But what those startups have is the benefit of crafting these things from the ground up with their finger on the pulse of what's important. I mean, a startup that starts next week will be very directly influenced by what Greta's been doing on climate change, right? Whereas a company that started 2 years ago, climate change was still a topic and it was important, but it won't have the same forefront to its employees as it would today.
Yeah.
So the question that I have is it scalable? Because these are initiatives that are really important, but I've worked in everything from incubations and startups all the way to Fortune 100 companies, and you find that when they get big, it gets tough. And I'm wondering, does that mean that we might not see as many big companies, or will we lose some of that as the millennials age and we just can't sustain it and scale? What do you think? I mean, we're speculating here, but
I think it's a really interesting question. We could probably do a full podcast on it, and also something I'm very passionate about it. I think there is room for this idea of like conscious capitalism for sure. But you're right in it almost has to be like the whole market decides that this is the direction we're moving. Because is it scalable when, you're pouring, let's say you're giving away, let's say in SaaS, you could easily give away 1 seat every time that you sell something and give that to charity. It's not a huge cost from you because it's already fixed, you're selling a deal. But if you're doing that and your competitor's not doing that and putting that money back into theirs and helping innovation and everything, you might lose the ability to innovate. So it almost has to be a market decision, and it's the people buying that are going to make that decision. If it's important to them and they're spending their dollars only with companies that are acting in a conscious manner, then it will be scalable. But it's, I think, the market that has to make that decision.
You touched on another really interesting point there as well, which is B2B buyers are really buying like consumers now, aren't they, in terms of how they look for their information.
Yes.
So they will be more and more empowered to control sort of the destiny of other organizations.
For sure.
Well, let's take that then and talk about diversity and inclusion and the trend there. What specifically, we know that, they're everything from government mandates to publishing reports about the wage gap to organizations certainly having promoted the fact that they're looking at creating diversity and hiring those people and going through extensive efforts to try and make their job recs gender neutral. What is it in the trend that might add to this already hot topic?
Yeah, I think in 2019, it seemed to come from almost more of like a moral place, right? It's like, hey, we need a more diverse and inclusive workplace because of course we do, But now, like, I know Harvard Business Review released a bunch of studies on, it's now like cold hard fact that diverse teams perform better.
And the companies are more profitable.
More profitable, right?
Yeah.
And so the jury's no longer out, and I don't think these will be side initiatives anymore. These will be at the forefront of all of our hiring practices, is how do we get more diversity in race, in gender, in school of thought, because frankly, it helps the bottom line now, which is so cool to see the moral line up with the business outcomes.
Yeah, it's just sensible. And I'm really happy that you talked about essentially the mindset, because I think it's the dimensions of diversity where we really need to focus now.
Yes.
Do they come from different socioeconomic backgrounds? Have they worked in different types and sizes of companies? Have they worked in different countries and different markets? And bringing all of that to bear certainly creates a lot of richness. And I think for that to take root, it is about setting or creating an environment where diverse thinking can flourish. Because when you bring diverse individuals, at its simplest, someone who just thinks a bit differently or comes from a different industry, into an environment where the ground's not been prepared, they won't thrive.